Welcome to Cast of Wonders, the fiction audio magazine for young adults featuring stories of the fantastic. I'm Graham Dunlop. Today we present part 2 of To Be True by Jess Hislop. If you didn't catch part 1, please go back and listen to episode 11. We gave Jess' bio last episode, so check the notes for episode 11 if you want to know more. Or you can find out more about Jess at lightningtreelive.wordpress.com and read more of her sci-fi and fantasy stories at elfwood.com. Please check the show notes for details. And now, we've a tale to tell. Creeping back along the corridor, Karima placed her feet carefully in front of her, ball first, then heel. She was concentrating so much on her steps that she didn't see the warrior until her bowed head bumped into his chest. She leapt back with a small cry.
"And what are you doing out of the Acolyte's chambers at such an hour?"
the warrior asked icily. He was an imposing figure, although his once strong shoulders were now sagging, and his stomach looked soft and too large.
"Were you not told to stay there until the morning chime?"
Karima felt herself trembling, but tried to stay calm. Guilt threatened to overwhelm her. Menra-Ona had relied on her to do this one simple task, but she'd failed within minutes. But this warrior had no idea of her true intention, and she couldn't let on that she was doing any more than sneaking out to get some fresh air. It had been her original plan anyway. "Yes, Warrior Chun," she murmured, inclining her head. "I'm sorry."
"And what is your excuse?"
Warrior Chen leant towards her, hands clasped behind his back.
"Not that any excuse will explain away rule-breaking, and so soon after you've arrived here."
He shook his head sadly. Karima felt anger stirring. How dare this warrior patronize her? Yesterday she would have revered every word he spoke, but now that Menra-Ona had revealed the truth to her, her respect for the warriors of this temple had vanished. It was a struggle to hide her feelings. "I couldn't sleep, Warrior Chun." She echoed what she'd said to Menra-Ona, but this time she would not be expanding upon it.
"So you decided to go for a walk, did you?"
Karima bowed her head again. "Yes, Warrior Chun. I apologize. I should not have done, I know. It won't happen again."
There are better ways to spend a night if you cannot sleep."
Karima's head shot up, and she was terrified to find Warrior Chun closer to her than she'd thought. She could feel his quickening breath on her cheeks. She stood frozen to the spot as his hand slid around her waist, pulling her even nearer.
"Your walk could take you to my chambers, could it not?"
he whispered huskily into her ear. Karima's eyes closed as his lips approached her neck. If she just shut them, maybe this would all go away. Maybe it was all a dream anyway. How could she have met a warrior of the truth in the temple grounds, especially one who wanted her to help him? And how could the noble warriors of the world have fallen to such licentiousness? It wasn't possible. It must be a dream. A familiar steely hiss brought her eyes snapping open.
"Remove your hands."
The voice was colder than she'd ever heard. Warrior Chun released Karima with a gasp. She stumbled backwards, almost falling on the hard floor. A hand appeared under her elbow to steady her. She looked up gratefully into the face of Menra'ona. "I'm sorry," she blurted. But he shook his head immediately.
"No, I am sorry. I should not have let you return alone. But you should go to the acolytes now. Get them clear."
His gaze returned to Warrior Chun, who had fallen to his knees and was staring at Menra'ona with an expression of utter disbelief. It was easy for Karima to slip past him and down the corridor towards the acolyte's chamber. As she did so, she heard Menra'ona address the fallen warrior.
"How can you look surprised? Did you think the True One would not see your actions? Do you think he cannot see into your heart? Or has your belief waned along with your morals? You think you can use the power of the Source and yet forget its creator?"
Karima did not hear Warrior Chun's reply, only a faint groan that trailed her up the passageway. The sleepy acolytes were not quick to respond to Karima's assertions. Some scoffed, some just stared, and some wouldn't even wake up until Karima shook them so hard she thought their heads might come unattached from their necks. Eventually, though, she managed to herd and bully them out of the dormitory and into the corridor. The main doors were the only way out of the temple. To get there, they would have to pass Warrior Chun and Menra'ona again. Karima led the acolytes that way.
"What do you think you're doing?"
Another ruffled warrior had appeared behind them, scowling tremendously.
"Where are you all going? Stop there!"
"Keep going," Karima instructed the other acolytes, but only some complied.
"How dare you!" the warrior growled at Karima. "There is no place for disobedience in the temple of the True One."
Karima lifted her chin. "You're wrong about that," she announced, and turned her back on him. Thud! Karima screamed as the weight of the warrior hit her full in the back, pinning her to the ground. She struggled wildly, but he was heavy and strong. The other acolytes were in a commotion, milling about, uncertain whether to obey Karima or the warrior, and stunned by his sudden violence. Other warriors were appearing now as well, disturbed from their slumber by Karima's scream. Seeing the situation, they started dragging the confused and terrified acolytes back to the sleeping chamber. "Menra'ona!" The warrior on top of her suddenly gave a great bellow, tensed, and went limp. His weight rolled off her, leaving Karima breathless on the hard floor. A hand grabbed her arm and lifted her to her feet. Karima felt wetness spreading down the front of her nightdress and was horrified to see it was soaked with blood. The warrior's blood.
"Get away from here," Menra'ona told her grimly. "I will handle this. Go."
Then he disappeared from her side, his sword out and flashing. He fell upon the warriors, his blade tracing arcs of silvery illumination through the air. Karima saw in her mind's eye the carving on the door of the temple, the sword of the Source, wielded for the True One, but a curving sword, grace and power combined in one. Coming to herself, Karima staggered down the passage. With a lurch of shame, she realized that all of the other acolytes had been forced back into their room by the warriors, and she was fleeing alone. But Menra'ona had told her to get away. She reached the doors and was outside in a matter of seconds. Shouts and cries of pain echoed behind her. But then another sound joined them, the clashing of steel upon steel. Evidently the other warriors had gathered their wits enough to grab their own weapons. Karima's heart lurched and she almost turned back. Warrior of the truth or not, the odds against Menra'ona were terrible. There were over 30 warriors resident at the temple, and Menra'ona was only one man. His sword could only be in one place at one time. As if to give weight to her fears, a huge crash resounded behind her as she reached the path. She spun around. Spilling out of the doors was a medley of warriors, and in their midst the whirling figure of Menra'on, his sword spinning with a deadly grace. But Karima could see that he was tiring, and his white robes were stained with crimson streaks. The huddle of fighting warriors progressed down the path, and Karima fled before them. She knew that she should do as Menra'on had said, get away from this site of carnage, but she could not bring herself to leave him unaided. She knew her fears must be foolish. His order would not have sent him alone if he could not handle the situation. But had she spoiled the plan by running into Warrior Chun in the corridor? If that was the case, she couldn't leave. Her honor wouldn't allow it. The fight had reached the edge of the lake. Menra'on was standing on the very brink, back turned to the water and the beautiful shrine in its center. His teeth were clenched with effort as he parried and lunged this way and that, trying to hold off at least 8 swords that relentlessly slashed towards him. Karima couldn't stand it. At any moment he would be stabbed, or he would fall off balance and into the lake, and they would be upon him. She took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "For the truth!" she cried, leaping forward and grabbing the legs of one of the warriors. He gave a grunt of surprise as his support was knocked from under him and fell heavily into one of his comrades. The 2 men hit the ground in a tangle of swords and limbs. Karima scrambled free, flushed with her success, but a cry of rage made her look up just in time to see a sword descending on her. Stupidly, she raised a hand to defend herself. Clang! The sound of blade on blade was so close it made Karima yelp.
"Karima,"
Menra'on said through clenched teeth.
"Didn't I tell you to...
Watch out!" But it was too late. The blade Karima had spotted lunging towards Menra'on's exposed side had already hit its mark, burying itself deep in his flesh. His silver eyes went wide, and a faint hiss whistled through his teeth. Another blade snaked across his shoulders. His whole body spasmed. Then the blades fell again and again, until his body was no longer pure, unblemished white, but saturated with crimson. Karima realized that she was screaming. She scrambled towards Menra'on's body, on her hands and knees, reaching out to touch him. But she was halted by the blood-soaked blade that touched her throat.
"Now," Warrior Chun said, "what are we to do with you, young one?"
The remaining warriors closed in on her, their eyes narrowed in malice.
"From what I can see," Warrior Chun continued, "you have a simple choice, Acolyte. Either you die here and now, like this ex-warrior, or you keep your mouth shut, tell no one what has occurred with here, and stay to complete your training."
Karima's mouth twitched in fury even as tears rolled down her cheeks. "You call yourselves warriors of the True One," she whispered, disgust twisting her voice. "You pollute the source." Warrior Chun's face darkened.
"You have caused enough trouble," he growled. "Choose now before we waste any more time on you. What is it to be? Death or a life with us? We can still teach you much, no matter what you think of us, and all we'd ask in return are a few favors."
Karima did not hesitate. "I will stay true. I choose death." Warrior Chun's eyebrows rose.
"Pity," he said. "You're a pretty one."
With a powerful lunge, he drove his blade into Karima's chest. The last thing she saw before plunging into darkness was the orb upon the shrine's roof, blazing bright white like a flaming pearl. Karima became aware of a cool touch on her forehead. It felt like silk. The sensation stirred something in her, something urgent, something that set her heart and soul a-clamour. She opened her eyes. The face that gazed down at her was like a marble statue, beautiful and calm. "Menre-Owen?" Karima breathed. He smiled down at her. "Karima, you have joined us." Something in the way he said it made Karima sure he didn't just mean waking up. She struggled to raise herself onto her elbows. "What?" Menre-Owen's hands eased her back down. "Don't be alarmed. Everything is fine now." "I'm not alarmed," she found herself saying, "just surprised." Menre-Owen's smile grew wider. "You must always be contrary, and that is what has brought you through." Through? Through what?" A rush of memory suddenly flooded her. She gasped. "But you died! And so did I! How are you? Where?" She trailed off, whilst Menre-Owen looked at her with what could almost have been called a smirk. "As I said, you have been brought through." "Please," Karima begged him, "tell me what's happened to me, to us. Through what?" Through death." Menre-Owen's voice was steady and soothing. "That is the final trial. To enter the training of the Order of the Truth, a warrior must prove that their dedication to the True One is greater even than their wish to live. You demonstrated that last night when you chose to die instead of besmirch the honor of the Source." Karima tried to take this all in. "The final trial," she breathed, "but those warriors, they killed me." A hand rose unconsciously to her chest as she remembered that moment, the steel blade sliding through her flesh, the unendurable pain. "Do you mean to say that was just part of a test?" Menre-Owen gently prized Karima's hand from her chest, then closing it in his own and giving it a comforting squeeze. "It was no set-up," he assured her. "The trial is no ordinary test. It is different for everyone, for it is never faked. It must be true. It is beyond the Order's power to arrange such things. But all events are known to the True One." "So, did you know that I would come through?" "Only the True One can know. I had only hope." Menre-Owen's eyes grew warmer. "But I had faith in you." A blush of joy rose in Karima's cheeks. She ducked her head to hide it, blurting out another question. "And what about you?" "Oh, I came through death a long time ago. It holds no power over me now. Believe me, those corrupt warriors were very surprised when they found out." He chuckled mirthlessly. Seeing Karima's puzzled expression, he elaborated, "The True One renews us with the power of the Source, refreshing our bodies each time, with a few improvements." His lips quirked. "What do you mean, improvements?" He lifted Karima's hand and she gasped in wonder and delight. Fingers entwined in his alabaster grasp, the hand he showed her was the same marble hue. Then he bent forward and hooked a lock of her hair from the pillow, bringing it in front of her eyes. It was the same silver white as his.
"Welcome to the High Temple of Truth,"
Menra'ona told her, smiling.
"Your training begins today."
And so ends To Be True. We hope you enjoyed this story. Drop by the forum and tell us what you think of To Be True. Visit castofwonders.org/forums and tell us. We'd love to hear from you. Cast of Wonders is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Yes, share it, but don't change it or sell it. Theme music is Appeal to Heavens by Alexei Nov from musicalley.com. Join us next time for a classic fantasy tale by Lord Dunsany, The Lute of Bomba Sharna.